Chapter 2. Okonkwo had just blown out the palm oil lamp and stretched himself on his bamboo bed when he heard the ogene of the town crier piercing the still night air. Gome, 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 boomed the hollow metal. Then the crier gave his message, and at the end of it beat his instrument again. And this was the message. Every man of Umofia was asked to gather at the marketplace tomorrow morning. Okonkwo wondered what was amiss, for he knew certainly that something was amiss. He had discerned a clear overtone of tragedy in the crier's voice, and even now he could still hear it as it grew dimmer and dimmer in the distance. The night was very quiet. It was always quiet, except on moonlight nights. Darkness held a vague terror for these people, even the bravest among them. Children were warned not to whistle at night for fear of evil spirits. Dangerous animals became even more sinister and uncanny in the dark. A snake was never called by its name at night because it would hear. It was called a string. And so on this particular night, as the crier's voice was gradually swallowed up in the distance, silence returned to the world, a vibrant silence made more intense by the universal trill of a million forest insects. On a moonlight night, it would be different. The happy voices of children playing in open fields would then be heard, and perhaps those not so young would be playing in pairs in less open places, and old men and women would remember their youth. As the Igbo say, when the moon is shining, the cripple becomes hungry for a walk. But this particular night was dark and silent, and in all the 9 villages of Umofia, a town crier with his ogone asked every man to be present tomorrow morning. Okonkwo, on his bamboo bed, tried to figure out the nature of the emergency. War with a neighboring clan? That seemed the most likely reason, and he was not afraid of war. He was a man of action, a man of war. Unlike his father, he could stand the look of blood. In Umofia's latest war, he was the first to bring home a human head. That was his 5th head, and he was not an old man yet. On great occasions, such as the funeral of a village celebrity, he drank his palm wine from his first human head. In the morning, the marketplace was full. There must have been about 10,000 men there, all talking in low voices. At last, TFA Ch stood up, and in the midst of them, bellowed 4 times, Umofia Kwenu, and on each occasion, he faced a different direction and seemed to push the air with a clenched fist. And 10,000 men answered, "Yeah!" each time. Then there was perfect silence. TFA Ch was a powerful orator, and was always chosen to speak on such occasions. He moved his hand over his white head, and stroked his white beard. He then adjusted his cloth, which was passed under his right armpit and tied above his left shoulder. "Umofia Kwenu," he bellowed a 5th time, and the crowd yelled in answer. And then suddenly, like one possessed, he shot out his left hand and pointed in the direction of Mbino, and said, through gleaming white teeth firmly clenched, "Those sons of wild animals have dared to murder a daughter of Umofia." He threw his head down and gnashed his teeth, and he allowed a murmur of suppressed anger to sweep the crowd. When he began again, the anger on his face was gone, and in its place a sort of smile hovered, more terrible and more sinister than the anger. And in a clear, unemotional voice, he told Umofia how their daughter had gone to the market at Mbino and had been killed. That woman, said Ch, was the wife of Ugboefi Udo, and he pointed to a man who sat near him with a bowed head. The crowd then shouted with anger and thirst for blood. Many others spoke, and at the end it was decided to follow the normal course of action. An ultimatum was immediately dispatched to Mbino, asking them to choose between war on the one hand, and on the other, the offer of a young man and a virgin as compensation. Umofia was feared by all its neighbors. It was powerful in war and in magic, and its priests and medicine men were feared in all the surrounding country. Its most potent war medicine was as old as the clan itself. Nobody knew how old, but on one point there was a general agreement. The active principle in that medicine had been an old woman with 1 leg. In fact, the medicine itself was called Agadi Nwai, or Old Woman. It had its shrine in the center of Umofia, in a cleared spot, and if anybody was so foolhardy as to pass by the shrine after dusk, he was sure to see the old woman hopping about. And so the neighboring clans who naturally knew of these things feared Umofia and would not go to war against it without first trying a peaceful settlement. And in fairness to Umofia, it should be recorded that it never went to war unless its case was clear and just, and was accepted as such by its oracle, the oracle of the hills and the caves. And there were indeed occasions when the oracle had forbidden Umofia to wage a war. If the clan had disobeyed the oracle, they would surely have been beaten, because their dreaded Agadi Nwai would never fight what the Igbo call a fight of blame. But the war that now threatened was a just war. Even the enemy clan knew that. And so when Okonkwo of Umofia arrived at Mbino as the proud and imperious emissary of war, he was treated with great honor and respect. And 2 days later, he returned home with a lad of 15 and a young virgin. The lad's name was Ikemefuna, whose sad story is still told in Umofia until this day. The elders, or Ndichi, met to hear a report of Okonkwo's mission. At the end, they decided, as everybody knew they would, that the girl should go to Ogbuefi Udo to replace his murdered wife. As for the boy, he belonged to the clan as a whole, and there was no hurry to decide his fate. Okonkwo was, therefore, asked on behalf of the clan to look after him in the interim. And so for 3 years, Ikemefuna lived in Okonkwo's household. Okonkwo ruled his household with a heavy hand. His wives, especially the youngest, lived in perpetual fear of his fiery temper, and so did his little children. Perhaps down in his heart, Okonkwo was not a cruel man, but his whole life was dominated by fear, the fear of failure and of weakness. It was deeper and more intimate than the fear of evil and capricious gods and of magic. The fear of the forests and of the forces of nature, malevolent, red in tooth and claw. Okonkwo's fear was greater than these. It was not external, but lay deep within himself. It was the fear of himself, lest he should be found to resemble his father. Even as a little boy, he had resented his father's failure and weakness. And even now, he still remembered how he had suffered when a playmate had told him that his father was a Agbala. That was how Okonkwo first came to know that an Agbala was not another name for a woman. It could also mean a man who had taken no title. And so Okonkwo was ruled by one passion, to hate everything that his father Unoka had loved. One of these things was gentleness, and another was idleness. During the planting season, Okonkwo worked daily on his farms from cock-crow until the chickens went to roost. He was a very strong man and rarely felt fatigue. But his wives and young children were not as strong, and so they suffered. But they dared not complain openly. Okonkwo's first son, Nguyen, was then 12 years old, but was already causing his father great anxiety for his incipient laziness. At any rate, that was how it looked to his father, and he sought to correct him by constant nagging and beating. And so Nguyen was developing into a sad-faced youth. Okonkwo's prosperity was visible in his household. He had a large compound enclosed by a thick wall of red earth. His own hut, or obi, stood immediately behind the only gate in the red walls. Each of his 3 wives had their own hut, which together formed a half-moon behind the obi. The barn was built against one end of the red walls, and long stacks of yams stood out prosperously in it. At the opposite end of the compound was a shed for the goats, and each wife built a small attachment to her hut for the hens. Near the barn was a small house, the medicine house, or shrine where Okonkwo kept the wooden symbols of his personal god and of his ancestral spirits. He worshipped them with sacrifices of kola nut, food, and palm wine, and offered prayers to them on behalf of himself, his 3 wives, and 8 children. So when the daughter of Umofia was killed in Mbino, Ikemefuna came into Okonkwo's household. When Okonkwo brought him home that day, he called his most senior wife and handed him over to her. "He belongs to the clan," he told her, "so look after him." "Is he staying long with us?" she asked. "Do what you're told, woman," Okonkwo thundered and stammered. "When did you become one of the Ndichi of Umofia?" And so Nguyen's mother took Ikemefuna to her hut and asked no more questions. As for the boy himself, he was terribly afraid. He could not understand what was happening to him or what he had done. How could he know that his father had taken a hand in killing a daughter of Umofia? All he knew was that a few men had arrived at their house, conversing with his father in low tones, and at the end he had been taken out and handed over to a stranger. His mother had wept bitterly, but he had been too surprised to weep, and so the stranger had brought him and a girl a long, long way from home, through lonely forest paths. He did not know who the girl was, and he never saw her again.